Hello, I'm Johan Chabangu, and welcome to Brain Injury United. In 2010, I was in a near-fatal car accident that resulted in me acquiring a brain injury. Well, what is a brain injury, you might ask? By definition, a traumatic brain injury refers to damage or destruction of brain tissue due to a blow to the head, resulting from an assault, a car crash, a gunshot wound, a fall, or the like. It is the same as a concussion or any form of head trauma. And that is why I do this show, to raise awareness on a medical condition that keeps growing and that has affected the best of us, and to provide resources to make sure that our survivors get the help they need. On today's show, we will interview Joe Tulin, a traumatic brain injury survivor who has an amazing story to share. Then, I will share a tip from an anonymous head trauma victim on how they cope with brain injury. Hello, I'm Johan Chabangu, and welcome to Brain Injury United. On today's show, we're interviewing Joe Tulin, a brain injury survivor from Massachusetts. But before we start, I'd like to start with some words of motivation from Napoleon Hill. It says, whatever the mind can conceive and believe, it can achieve. Joe, what does this quote mean to you?
Well, Johan, I think that this is a very motivational quote, and it's very important to the recovery from brain injury, where challenges get put into people's lives who experience trauma and brain injury from concussions and other contacts which leave you with an injury. And the way that you recover is you need, and this is often medically aided, you need to see an image of yourself getting better, and then you need to put together a plan in order to achieve it. And then once you achieve it, it feels much better. Mm-hmm. So I'm in that process myself. I've had a few brain injuries because of motor vehicle accidents.
Okay, and that goes into what I wanted to speak to you about. Share your story.
Well, my story started several years ago. I was in several motor vehicle accidents where it wasn't my fault. I was just driving along safely, and some other cars would come and drive recklessly around me, resulting in a rear-end collision that just slammed in the back of me. I was jostled forward and suffered a concussion, resulting in post-concussion syndrome.
Okay. And
post-traumatic stress disorder. Mm-hmm. After the first one, I was experiencing a traumatic effect where in the brain injury community they call it a before and after effect to do with your brain injury. So before I was feeling good, and then after I was hit with the motor vehicle accident, I was not feeling good. So I sought the advice of my primary care physician, mm-hmm. and they referred me to a neurologist and also a chiropractor. So I went into treatment and I started to get my diagnosis, and that helped me to understand what I needed to do in order to get better.
Now, do you feel like you were correctly diagnosed?
Yes, I think I was correctly diagnosed.
Why?
Because I was feeling the things that were synonymous with the diagnosis. So I was having trouble forming short and long-term memories. Mm-hmm. I was having trouble with exhaustion and fatigue. I was having trouble with pain and discomfort. I was having trouble regaining my my good feeling. Like I would just feel awful.
So, feeling awful from being in the accident, but the accidents weren't your fault. Is it safe to say that you had feelings of paranoia on the road, being that other drivers were crashing into your vehicle?
Yes, very much so. I was paranoid in a way that I knew I had to pay much more attention to all three of my mirrors in my car when I was driving.
Your surroundings.
Yes, to make sure that people, who were driving radically, I would be able to defensively drive and switch lanes or be well out of their way so they could pass by me, so I wasn't putting myself in front of them where they would hit me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is something that is explained in the treatment of motor vehicle survivors, is to be more cautious on the road and always be looking through all of your mirrors to protect yourself from oncoming hazards.
Okay. Is there anything else that you'd like to share about your experience?
Yeah, so I've gotten very involved in the brain injury community. I've done things from neurology to psych neuro testing, chiropractic treatment, massage, physical therapy, including vestibular therapy, speech cognitive therapy, which I particularly think that people who have suffered any sort of concussion are advised to try this type of therapy out, because it helps you understand who you are and what your capabilities have been and what you lose or are at risk before and after a brain injury. Mm-hmm. And it really helps you understand what you need to be prepared to deal with, and the losses you might suffer as a result of a brain injury.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's amazing. You've done a lot, and what would you like to accomplish in the community?
Well, I like to be very active in the community. I do a lot of peer support. I go to monthly groups in several areas throughout Massachusetts and New Hampshire, and I try to tell people my story and all the therapies that have been successful for me and what other resources that are out there that people can turn to help them recover from their brain injury.
Okay.
This is often a very long journey for people.
Right.
So as soon as they can connect to this brain injury community, the better, because it's really open to helping people feel better, understand their deficits is what they call it, which are absence of ability, and to help them succeed in life.
And I'm happy that you use the word journey, because that's exactly what it is. Being in a situation where an accident happens to you, or you happen to be in an accident and you have to get better, you don't get better overnight.
Yeah, that's for sure. It's
been
been a few years for me so far, and of all the people that I've met with brain injuries, mm-hmm. they've been longer than me, most of them.
Right, and it is a journey to recovery. Where can people go to get involved?
Well, I would start with your primary care physician, and then they would refer you to rehab hospitals in the area, as well as neurologists and speech pathologists, and they are normally who manage support groups and referrals to different therapies. Also, there is an organization called the Massachusetts Brain Injury Association,
yes,
based in Westboro, who help to organize most of the peer support community and often have resources that individual hospitals contribute to.
Okay. And as far as your involvement in the community and wanting to see a change in the community, of getting more people involved, and not only people that suffer from brain injuries, but also caretakers, in what time frame do you believe these things can take place?
What time frame?
Yes.
Well, I think that in the first few months, the feeling is very traumatic. You are not really sure what is going on, and you just sort of have to trust what your primary care physician says. and go through the different therapies. So that's like the first 3 to 6 months. Then after that, the recovery often gets more accelerated, sort of in an intermediate phase, and you start to plan out your life, not really as an emergency, but as an ongoing lifestyle. Some people call it your new life, living with disability as a survivor of a brain injury. And at that point, the socialization really helps a lot, and that can last for the rest of your life.
Right. And why is this important?
It's important to understand what your experience is from another person's perspective, because sometimes you live with things that bother you, and there are medical solutions to make you get relief from those problems, which doesn't mean you go out and, you take chemicals or anything like that. It means that you just understand why your interaction with the world is not as high functioning as some other people, and to know what you need to say and do to say, oh, well, this is my life story. This is what happened to me. I was in a car accident or had a heart attack or a stroke or a gunshot wound, and that's why I am who I am. And try to understand that, and that helps people move along in the way that they present themselves to people.
You touched on a key point here, and you mentioned the effect of having to function, but you don't function at the same level as everyone else around you, maybe a little less than everyone else around you. And that is why I begin the show with motivation, and I like to touch on motivation, just to give people the belief that as long as they believe in themselves, they can still accomplish the things. You may be used to getting straight A's, so to speak, but you may have to settle for a few B's and some C's. You still get your degree at the end.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that that's also a motivating example to follow, is that the accommodations for this type of disability are brought to the healthcare associated with it. So right now, another element of the community that I'm looking to help develop is one-on-one cognitive care, where there's a lot of personal care assistance associated with physical limitations, and many people in the brain injury community actually have severe physical limitations. They're in wheelchairs or need to walk with canes and have aphasia, which means like part of their face doesn't work right, and things like that. But for other people who are suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, especially, it's all just...
Also known as PTSD.
Yes. It's really their cognitive limitations. So they might not be able to memorize things as much. They might be a little bit slower to speak with, or people might seem like they don't have patience to deal with them or something, and they need some extra help in life. So I'm really advocating right now to get some extra support for those people.
Is there anything else you would like to add?
Yeah, I think that it's important for people to understand that people with post-traumatic stress disorder, post-concussion syndrome, and other types of traumatic brain injury, whether they're at fault or not, it's something that people need to learn about, and they need to be sensitive to, and they need to know what their role is. But everyone are involved in the community when you interact with people, and I guess my best wisdom is that you just need to look at the people like they're regular people, and try to help them out where you can.
Yeah.
And when you can't, there are other people in the healthcare community looking out for them.
Yeah. Well, Joe Tulung, thank you for coming to the show, and thanks for sharing.
Yeah, thanks, Johan. It was a pleasure to come here today.
All right. Now, let's turn the conversation on how to cope with head trauma. Here is a tip from an anonymous head trauma victim on how they cope with TBI. They said, Merriam-Webster defines cope as to deal with and attempt to overcome problems and difficulties. I'm not sure how I cope well with head injury symptoms. They seem to get the best of me most days, at least the physical symptoms. The cognitive problems have come a long way, but there's room for improvement. My biggest thing is that people don't know all about my issues and that I maintain a bit of privacy. I've worked hard to overcome a lot of stuff over the years, and then pile on head injury, and you have one big mess of a person. I feel that if people knew about all the stuff I have going on, they would shun me or judge me in a negative way. So keeping things to myself is a big concern of mine. When I was growing up, my father instilled in me that no matter what happens in life to knock you down, you need to get up, dust yourself off, and get back on the trail. I always knew growing up that my father was overseas during World War II, but I never knew exactly what he did or where he was until after he died. One day I asked my mother if he was part of D-Day, and she said he was, and he was also part of Battle of the Bulge. I went through a box of very old photos and found 3 black and white ones of him overseas with some of his group. One of the pictures is of him in a rubble of a building they had blown up. He was in field artillery. I take that picture out when I'm feeling overwhelmed and feel like I have nothing left in me. Just can't cope anymore. I look at that picture and understand his words. No matter what happens in life to knock you down, you need to get up, dust yourself off, and get back on the trail. I feel that if my father could march all over Europe and be part of some of the bloodiest battles of World War II and come back in one piece, then I can cope with head injury. Sometimes, when I'm having an off day with the physical symptoms of head injury, I also remind myself that this is not a terminal brain cancer, this is not ALS, and that I have all my arms and legs. I am doing good. I hope you learned something from this tip. I learned that no matter how hard the journey to recovery is, or how hard it gets, never give up. That's our show for today. If you are in need of support or resources, you are welcome to attend the Behavioral Brain Injury Survivors and Caregivers Support Group at Whittier Rehabilitation Hospital, located on 145 Ward Hill Avenue in Bradford, Massachusetts, 01835. They meet on the second Tuesday of each month. You can also contact Tress Ricker at 508-475-0032. Brain Injury United Clinic of America, coming soon. Thank you, and see you next time on Brain Injury United.